are all weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.
Hello, everybody. Jim here. And if you didn't know, this week, the Tim Drake Robbins series ended with issue 10. And instead of doing a review of that issue, I figured that I'd talk in general about why this Tim Drake Robbins series failed. I've seen a couple videos, even before this, way before this, talking about why it was failing. A lot of these videos do come down to the phrase, get woke, go broke. I'm going to try to go a little deeper than that. A lot of times I find that that's more of a slogan than an argument. And if you get involved in that, all you're going to do is have a shouting match, each side just yelling stuff at each other. And I don't think anybody's ever going to get anything resolved that way. So what I want to do is, allow me to go a little deeper than that, though I'm not discounting that either. Because as you'll see, I think there were 3 reasons why this Tim Drake Robbins series failed. They are, number 1, DC doesn't understand or care about their core audience. Number 2, DC and Megan FitzMartin had an awful plan to win readers over. And number 3, this book was written for no one. We'll go with the number 1. DC doesn't understand or care about their core audience. Tim's coming out as bisexual turned a lot of people off. A lot of people wanted no parts of it. A lot of people were yelling that it didn't make sense. It wasn't set up. And I can't say that they were wrong. I do think that DC underestimated the amount of people who would think that. I think that they were hoping that people would give all this a chance. And in the meantime, a lot of people said they would never read a Megan FitzMartin Tim Drake story after her initial deal where Tim Drake came out in that 3-issue Urban Legends deal. So with all of that, though, whether that if you're sitting there and you think, well, that's not good, or you're like, yeah, that was me. It doesn't matter. Good, bad, fair, or unfair. That still shows that DC doesn't know their core audience. They did not see a lot of this coming, though you would hope that they would have. But here's the thing. As we get into this and go into the next reason, some things are going to meld together. And I do think that I might be able to convince a bunch of people that, in fact, they would have read the Tim Drake bisexual story if it was done in a slightly different way. And I know that people are probably like, you ain't going to convince me of nothing, Jim. But we'll see. We'll see. We'll get back to that in a second, because the second issue, or the second reason that I said, was DC didn't have a good plan of how they were going to do this. Megan FitzMartin, pretty much unknown writer. She ended up doing the 2-issue Robin Eternal story in Future State. Most people didn't read that, and most people have already forgotten about it. So then she ends up writing 3-issue arc in the Batman Urban Legends anthology book, issues 4, 5, and 6, I believe. And in that, most people were picking up that book for Chip Zdarsky's Red Hood story, and maybe even a little bit of the Matthew Rosenberg Grifter story. So you end up having Megan FitzMartin just having this Tim Drake story about chaos monsters, Bernard, a callback to his old friend in there. It was a mess. That story, if it didn't end with Tim Drake coming out as bisexual, nobody would ever talk or remember that story ever again. The only reason it became anything was because at the end, Tim Drake revealed that he is in fact bisexual and he is going to date Bernard. Now, some people who were reading, reviewing it, and talking about it on a podcast, I'm talking about me, Mr. Naive, I didn't see it coming. I heard people, and people even messaged me, said, oh, I think they're going to do something with Tim and his sexuality here, him and Bernard. And you're crazy. There's nothing there, because there wasn't. Eric on the podcast ended up getting upset and said, what, 2 dudes can't go out to dinner together? What the heck? So it became a joke. We thought that people were out of their minds. But for them, there was something there, I guess, but I didn't see it. So at the end of that series, boom, Tim Drake's bisexual. People ended up, it became a big thing on Twitter, people celebrating it, people pissed off about it. But none of them would tell you that it was set up. It came out of nowhere, and that's one of the biggest problems. with this. When somebody who you don't trust, somebody who you don't know is a good writer, you don't know that they know the character. And I say trust, and what I mean is trust that they're able to write a good story, but also trust that they have the best intentions for that character. You have no idea. She just only wrote that story. So when somebody comes in and just writes that story, it only can feel like an agenda. It can only feel like something was forced. And this is where I'll get back to the people who said, I'd never read this. It's easy to say, I'll never read a Megan FitzMartin story, especially at that point. I'm not a drinker. I could say that for July, I'm giving up vodka. Very easy for me, right? So the idea, though, in my mind, now you have to play a what if. This would never happen, but that's what ifs are, right? What if, and I'll even throw in that DC gives Chuck Dixon $1 trillion to write this story. First off, it's probably going to be better. We'll push that aside. I think that people would say, well, I don't know if I like this, but if it's somebody that you trust, that knows the character, has the character's best intentions, and has something that they want to do because you know they must have a story to tell, I think that you would be more willing to at least give it a try. Even if you are against it, you still might give it a try because you trust that writer. You trust that they're doing something good here. Nobody could have had that trust with Megan FitzMartin. There is no trust at all. She hasn't earned that. She's only written a couple issues in general, let alone a couple Tim Drake issues. So it is already starting out where people think this is forced because that's how it looks. So you think about, and we'll get back to this planning deal. So DC has to see this. I mean, they may be dumb, but they shouldn't be blind. They see this reaction. So what can you do? What can you do before you end up announcing the Tim Drake Robin series? Well, what you can do is let Megan FitzMartin write a couple more issues, hopefully with Tim, where she can win over readers and prove that she can be trusted, prove that she knows the characters, prove that she has their best interest in mind. So what they end up doing, the first thing that she writes with this then, is they collect the Urban Legends book, those 3 stories, they collect it into a trade, and then add an extra story in. The extra story where Stephanie Brown finds out that Tim is indeed bisexual, dating Bernard, and goes to meet him. Boy, this could be something where you really get down and dirty with a realistic portrayal of what would happen, not even just on Tim's side, but Steph's side. And in that, Steph shows up, meets Bernard, says, oh my God, this is the best day ever in my life. You don't understand. This is the greatest thing ever. Holy moly. That's it. And when people read that, you could only laugh. It felt like propaganda. It almost felt like right before that scene, somebody held a gun up to Steph's head and said, you better do the lines or you're in big trouble. So she waltzes in, says lines, and leaves. Didn't feel natural, and so it felt even more forced. So now you're really not winning over fans. So what can you do next? You end up having Megan FitzMartin write a miniseries to the big Dark Crisis event. And I know the people who read that miniseries are already giggling. She ends up writing the Young Justice miniseries, the tie-in miniseries into Dark Crisis. And in that miniseries where she's trying to hopefully win over readers who will then go off and read the Tim Drake series, she actually points fingers at most of them and says they're toxic assholes. That's what that series ended up being. She ended up showing up and saying, hey, listen, anybody who's a fan of this book, you know, the book with the team that you're buying here, that you're putting money down, yeah, you're toxic assholes because this whole team and everything about it back in the 90s was toxic and really awful. So people, screw you. So there. Then, even if that's bad enough, she also wrote a book that made no sense and proved issue after issue that she doesn't know these characters. She ended up writing that book like someone who briefly scanned a Wikipedia entry, saw some key points, didn't realize that a lot of these were either resolved or nothing anymore, and then just ended up basing a story around that made no sense. It was, a lot of people talk about this, the worst comic of the last bunch of years. It was that bad. So again, if you were hoping, or DC was hoping to win fans over, she actually fought against them, called them assholes, and proved that she doesn't know these characters. So then we go to the Tim Drake Robin series comes out, issue 1. Here we go. And this is where I'll go to the last point. The book was written for no one. And you may think that I mean something else for what I'm going to say. So first off, people who were already writing it off, saying, I'm not going to read a Megan FitzMartin deal, I'm out, they're already out. So I think there's 2 remaining groups left. One group, and I'm included, thought, well, okay, I don't know, this feels weird, but I always like to give a book a chance. So I'm showing up hoping that maybe there's a good story. Maybe I can have some fun. Maybe it'll be something worth reading a little. It wasn't. It was awful. It was terrible. It was convoluted. It made no sense. She didn't know the characters, and to top it off, pretty bad art. So there was no reason for anybody who was like, well, I think that I'll give it a shot. They bailed quickly. So we have one last group, and this is a group that I think get unfairly pointed at by a lot of people surrounding this whole deal. It's the people who, said, oh my God, Tim Drake's bisexual. I've never read DC Comics, or I've never read a Tim Drake story. I think I'll check this out. And a lot of people have said to me, and I've even argued with people, that people said, well, there's not really anybody. That's a ghost group. There's nobody that really thought that. They end up tweeting whatever, but they'll never buy it. But here's the thing. It was an awful book. Why do you think that anybody's going to keep buying an awful book? It just because of whatever sexuality or whatever you are. People like to read good comics, but I'll go further than that. Because if you did, and this will kind of rely on some people, if you did read the series, number one, it was not a good jumping on point for any new reader. It wasn't a book that ended up easing you into DC Comics or easing you into Tim Drake. So if DC wanted to get new readers, they certainly weren't writing the book for them. I'll even go further with the art. I know that some people will defend Riley Rossimo's art. I don't like it, but I think that most people will agree it's not great art for new readers to jump into their first DC comic. It's also not great for readers who might not know the lay of the land with Tim Drake. They need to be guided. It's just a mess, and it adds to the mess of what was the script. So the last thing, though, and again, this might get some people upset, but I'll tell you, if you thought you weren't going to read the Tim Drake book because it was going to be overly sexualized and all that, it wasn't. But you almost promised these other people who you wanted to be new readers to come in that that's what it would be about. That it would be about more of the relationship, more about, yeah, it's a superhero, but it's going to be more of a slice of life book that ends up exploring, a blossoming sexuality, a changing thing with Tim Drake, and it barely touched on that. It really didn't touch on that enough if you wanted to win that group over. So they show up. It seems like the book isn't even what they were promised. It's confusing. It's not a good jumping on point. So if DC was trying to get this book to get new readers, a more diverse crowd in, they did a horrible job. And this book was not written for them either. It was written for nobody. And really, when it all comes down to it, the biggest problem with this book is it was a horribly, horribly written book. Convoluted story, art that you could barely tell what was going on. It was awful. And so there's a lot of reasons to get mad at this Tim Drake Robin series, not just slogans. This book was a mess from day one. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again right here. If Tim Drake was straight and dating Stephanie Brown in this book, it still would have been a failure and still would have stunk, because at the base level, this book had no setup. The plot progression was awful. Reveals out of nowhere. Bad character work. Bad art. Everything about it was awful. So that's why it failed. Yes, everybody, I think, can agree there are multiple reasons all rolled up into an epic fail that probably was allowed to continue a little more instead of DC course correcting, just hoping that people would eventually read it, because it was awful. So in the end, I think that what we can learn from this, and why I like to kind of think of different reasons and why things do fail or succeed, what I learned is that you can change characters, but you really need to do it in a way that they know that it's being done naturally, in a way that the readers can trust that you have the best interest for the characters. And the best way to do that is to get a writer who has that trust, who has that history, that has proven time and time again that they know what is best for that character. And so if you do this, you can't just end up throwing a new writer, say, you do this, make this change, and then have the writer start writing things that attack fans. That it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And that's why I think that it failed. But please let me know why you didn't read it, or if you liked it even. I mean, there's going to be some people watching this that will say, no, I loved it. I thought that it had all those things. And I like to talk about all of this with everyone, have discussions, not really arguments. Some may call them arguments, but I call them discussions. And then with that too, please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, enable the notifications, because I think that I'll start doing more of these types of videos. I get more engagement with them, and I have a lot of fun discussions with people about stuff like this. And yeah, let me know. Maybe you think I'm full of crap. Maybe you think, oh my God, I think there's even more reasons, and there are. But I thought those were the three major ones. So let me know. Hey, everybody, hopefully we can get better books. That's all we all want. And really, that's one of the main things. Here's the solution to all this. Have people write better books. That's it. So thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you all later.
You are all weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.